I am Vittorio Bromhuber, the chosen one.
This is my sweet new rescue, my sweet baby. This is, we named his name. His name was Whispers, and they named him that at the rescue. He had an abusive background, but we adopted him. Anyway, I joke and call him White Power. And his nickname, I'm a film guy, so I named him True Romance. And this is my God child. This is Godspar, my sweet baby Godspar. Everybody say hi, Godspar. 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 And so I joke that she's my black little girl. And some of it represents the yin and yang. So I was gonna do this video about racism. Okay, so I'm whatever. You can't really tell what I am. I mean, I'm white-ish, but I'm not gonna give it away and tell you what I am. So if you could guess my race, then then it's about racism, right? But so the reason I was reluctant to do it is because I'm the chosen one, so I see everything different, regarding societal issues in our history than most people ever would. I'm an anomaly. So I'll explain it the best that I can, okay? So racism was created to know the opposites of what we once were. We used to all be just a white infinite light. And when we became conscious, I don't know how that moment happened, but it happened, and that's why we're here. And when we became conscious, we said we're going to create every multifaceted point of view I can to learn from, to separate myself from what I used to be in terms of our identity. Because we just were. It just is. There was no struggle. There was no conflict. There was nothing to fight about. That's why we created the fight over mating rights, territory, and resources, which most things, any conflict, is a byproduct of that. All right. So that's why race was created, and also racism. The cotton was white that black people picked because we believed that we would create the darkness over that fight of the outside, who controls those three things, and that we would send this chosen one, this man, me, Vittorio, and that I would be able to beat internally all of the past logic and creation, including the fight over racism. My life hasn't been that deeply affected by racism because my father's a white guy, German, Irish, and a little Jewish, and my mother is, I think, mainly white, like that stuff, and then she's from an island and has some Nigerian and West African in her. So I just gave it away there. But that's why I could pass for part Native American or Hawaii, white mixed with something, right? So, but in my life, my friends growing up called me Spictorio, or my, white part of my family would joke and say the N-word or whatever. And my cousin, who was a quarter black, we grew up calling each other nigger all the time because that's just the way that we talked, right? So, it did it more in a fun way. And then I've had some instances come up, good and bad, with regarding that, or dating and competition over girls, right? And that part, the reason I kind of drag my feet on this video is because it's just not that fascinating to me. I think I know there's a lot of pain caused from it, and people get very passionate about it or hateful over it, but it's not my thing. I didn't grow up with that being a big part of my trajectories, meaning what was in my psychology, right? It was an aspect of it, was a part of it, good and bad, right? So I'll go to communities like team sports or, like football. That's a part of what helped people get over that and start seeing each other as brothers, beyond race, even if people are racist, or interracial marriages where, you have a child. But both parties had a point, right, always, right? So it's not right to be slaves, and that's obvious, and that's not sloughing it off. But the source knew it was going to enslave itself on some level energetically, but just to what degree, right? And the ultimate freedom is us being in the laws of physics, and the whole point of view that says we're separate in any way at all, so that we become one being, one energy source again that can travel through itself in the state of being a just pure love, perfect male, perfect female. And black wouldn't exist in that way, right? So they pick cotton because we believe in that movement. Look at the movement. Say I'm in the field, I'm picking cotton, okay? The cotton was us, and it was white because we all used to be white, and that was a part of what we lost, was that state. The white people, even my dog, is still not energy amplified, and the dog is extremely white, right? But so my point with that is, we knew we were going to lose certain things and sacrifice certain things by being in this world where we took this major risk by experimenting with the dark and its extremes. And there's been a lot of extreme abuse in terms of slavery and racism and stuff like that. And there was white people in history that were slaves too. Okay, it's not our natural state of being, but we didn't have a natural state of being We just were, but the world was very foreign to us because of the abuse and the visceral part of it, right? And the reward why our semen is white is because when we win, ultimately, we will return to that. So this is all regarding racism. I've given other talks, but this is more about race. So, but that return internally in the pleasure is the state of being we're supposed to be in, but that amplified to an extreme. That's what heaven and God is about. But I always say this, that has to be made out of our energy source and is a state of being connection and reality, that all things have to return to being as an equal. All right. So imagine that I'm in the field, I'm picking cotton, and that all that struggle and all that, point of view, the bigger picture was that God, which is a state of being that we're all meant to achieve, it would be astral projected and move through us, because our counterparts were us. We were equal. They're just playing both sides of the fence, both light and dark, and that we were going to return to each other, love in a perfect way. But so that movement was a part of that offering back as we fought. They have people in the fields, hundreds of years ago that have nothing and are just being used, to people like LeBron James today or Obama, very powerful African-American people. Okay, so, and that's a part of the ascension and saying, yes, we will fight back in the heart, the fight back for community as well. So you have a mess in it like you always do in the dualities of the universe, right? In our relationships and communication, in perspective. And I'll clarify. So you have black people that just side with black people and hate white people because of the past and that sort of thing. And then you have people that are their arguments a little bit more complex than that, and their own questioning, and also the mixes of friendship and race. And then there's all the other different races and how it's viewed. Okay, and I'm just talking about this aspect of it, right? Because there's more nuances in how that's intertwined in the details, the mixture of perspective. So for me in my life, it hasn't been that, but I'm just saying, we return to the outside being perfect, and it'll be beyond what that white was, right? That's a part of it, but it'll be beyond that. So I'm like a beautiful exotic. I take that to the next level beyond what the Aryans and people that was their life of hating other races, and that was a superior race. And this isn't popular, but they did have a point. It doesn't seem politically correct, or it seems like I'm a racist. Look at me, I wouldn't fit in with them and those types of people. I'm an artist, and my spiritual beliefs are out there for the norm. So even though their contradiction, is usually they were Christians or something like that, and that's a huge contradiction because that's not what it really teaches, right? So. And that's all misunderstood here anyway. But my point is that they weren't completely wrong, because we wrote that script going, we're not going to just agree about these things to get along until all the theories proven meaning I clear the astral projections, have a perfect karmic slate, and the trajectories that we set up for me to clear is my part of the karma, because everybody took it on in whatever the damage was, whatever the abuse was, whatever the loss was and sacrifice was, and also your reward system you're earning, the love you felt, the things you won, the good experiences you had. I'll talk about that with depression, anxiety, because the Great Depression, we're meant to reverse it, and the Great Happiness was a part of our spiritual awakening. There's all reversals in that, in the dialogue, right? In the lines. I'm a writer as well, so I like dialogue, like the lines. But so but the bigger picture, and I'm trying to say, and the aliens too, there are lots of different colors. I know this because I used to receive a lot of messages from them in my third eye. When I was a healer, I talked to them in that way all the time, and we would get messages from them, and so would the team. But the whatever colors they are, but they're fighting over the same design. So the major message in that is that it's always going to exist until divine intervention happens. And that's why people, that intellectuals, don't understand how to really solve it. They argue about it. And there's what's going on internally in that argument, and then how you're meant to be viewed in the world, or what will persuade people the most is what I'm trying to say. But what my point in that is, it's always going to exist on some level. And I'm not trying to persuade anybody with what I'm saying. This is more like a video journal to me. But the point is that we return to having something that we already had, that we gave away to learn from. And the lesson in it is to be able to overcome it and return to being one energy where that doesn't affect us, but also the victory is tangible. There won't be a black person ever again. And what the Aryans and people that were white called white will be like an amplified and greater version of that, but will be equal. And then there's the cool blue streaming, I call it, because we're really light energy in colors. Our energy source is that more than a human point of view, because we're meant to turn into God. And so like the Aryan, the blue eyes, that's supposed to represent, instead of hatred over the outside, it's supposed to represent pure love, unconditional love, but pure love emanating from all of us towards ourself, the whole energy source channeling through itself and forever expanding in this new design where there's no flaws or conflict at all war would end, and that's an aspect of war and a part of it, and why we were controlled through the design that way, because it's like any of the trajectories that are connected to those patterns. There's these fluctuating patterns and conflict and ups and downs, why you have the opposite of that, which is love, and it's fragmented. What I mean by that, I'll give you an example. The soldier's in the field and he's fighting and he has all this hatred towards the enemy, but at the same time he has love for his brother and maybe even compassion on some days for the enemy. Just being a human. So that's an example of that, and that mixture or that kind of conflict duality. We're talking about eliminating the duality and remembering that we wrote each other's scripts, and we used to beat each other. So we agreed so that we could challenge ourselves to see if we could beat what that was going to cause. So it really, to me, it's not as interesting as like what's on Mars and the other planets, what's in space, because that's a human thing where we know how to fight over racism and have that history, and we know all about it. But what do we know? What do we not know about, say, Mars or Venus? The other planets that we haven't traveled through, and the details there. They'll look at it if they get there from a point of view that is about terraforming, which is colonization, and that's a part of the problem that they don't see. They don't see the disease in that, in any dissension. I see the disease in it where the planet itself would have to wake up. But my point is, that kind of stuff is more fascinating to me than the racial issue, because that will be easily be solved, and it won't be a problem. But there's nothing for me to learn there at this point, because I see through it. I see the purpose in it, in the good that came from it, and what it meant, and what the solution is this spiritual awakening where it's tangible and literal, meaning we morph into something else anyway, and that point of view was something that we're meant to beat and conquer and overcome. So the space travel, that sort of thing, and the other things that can be reversed are even more fascinating to me. Like ailments and sickness, diseases, and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going off into some of the tangents and some of the other stuff that I talk about, but I just wanted to do this talk about race because it's been something that's come up a lot, and it's not something, I'm an actor, it's not something that I'm that good at, is playing that kind of character, because one, the way I look, I could be a beautiful exotic, maybe mixed with something, but I don't necessarily fit in either community. But community is something, in my neighborhood where I grew up in a black neighborhood for a while when I was a teenager, and I didn't hang out with the black dudes there because they weren't my friends from high school, wherever. I'm not racist, I didn't have community with them. I hung out with my gym brothers, and the guys that I were close to happened not to be black. One guy was like mixed like me, German and Filipino, and I was the mud in it, and then my buddy Chris was white, and I hung out with everybody in the gym, and everybody knew me. But community is a big part of what we use to overcome that sort of thing in separation. And when I moved to LA, I studied the method, and I studied with, one of my closer friends was a guy named Mark, and he was black, and I didn't give a fuck. He was one of my best friends ever. And I, for what Earth standards are, and I had another buddy, and he was black too, and I wasn't as close to him, but we were still all like a spiritual family, because we were, misfits from wherever, and all studied together out there, and we cared so much about the same thing, our careers and the method itself, and writing, all the arts, connected to filmmaking, and you could see in that, not that that was my bag to carry where I needed to overcome that, but it's an example of why I didn't hang out with the dudes in my neighborhood. It was a poor neighborhood, and people were selling crack and shit like that, and so there was a separation there because of mentality, and also what was of interest to the person, right? So, those are generalizations, but just in general, that wasn't attractive to me in that way. But acting in the method was very attractive. And actually, like my buddy Mark, he went to like Dartmouth or something like that. I didn't even graduate high school, but the people that I was around helped me become much more intelligent, and then I ended up becoming this genius and anomaly years later, and surpassing the past, and including what that connection is in those realities. So I just wanted to make it clear that's how that problem and issue gets solved. And it's sad, being 2026, because even when we said, okay, we're all going to get along, it still doesn't achieve the goal. So if we say, okay, we're never going to fight over racism again, that's not a possibility because of the way the patterns fluctuate and what we set in motion, without the spiritual awakening that I'm talking about. But it's very possible when that happens, because I'm the chosen one. I believe in real miracles. I'd like to laugh at racism, bring a black dude that's like super fucking black on stage and turn him into the being that he's supposed to turn into, and he'd be white, and that be returned, and then in that issue, and use that as symbolism for the godlike miracles that I know are possible in that problem and issue.